Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 30th of September 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have with me Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie, speaking from Scotland, and also Ben Rubin, who's coming in on the link from London. Now, one of the things that UK Column has been saying to our audience is it's becoming increasingly clear that it isn't national governments, it's not the UK government that's actually running the country. Our governments are simply the spokespeople for agenda coming in from the rules-based international order, of which the UN forms a key part. So, Diane, let's bring you in straight away with giving a bit of background to what this pernicious organisation is up to.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And hello, Ben. Happy to be here today. So I've been covering the past week the UN General Assembly, which officially concludes today, the 30th of September. For the past week, there has been a lot of action, as we saw last week, starting with the Summit of the Future, which led to the adoption of the Pact of the Future. And then we spent the last week in meetings in what was called the General Debate of the General Assembly of the UN. And there's been a lot of discussions from talks from the heads of state from around the world, the 193 member states, all participating and all having an equal vote in the General Assembly. And it's from the 79th session of the General Assembly, just so that we know, so that we're clear, the theme is leaving no one behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for present and future generations. So I spared everyone the video that they created from this past week. I've just got a couple of still images that I took out of their video. You can see the full thing on X if you would really like to. It first talked about the Pact being the landmark new agreement, which will redefine global cooperation for generations. We had the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, saying our world is in a whirlwind, so talking about the change and acceleration that's happening. And we also had a special SDG moment with world leaders and special guests. So I'm sure that was a lovely time had by all. What I want to focus on is Sir Keir Starmer and his address to the General Assembly, which happened on Thursday last week. Let's hear what Keir had to say.
My message today is this. We are returning the UK to responsible global leadership because I think the international system can be better. We need it to be better. People talk about an age of polarization, impunity, instability, an unraveling of the UN Charter. And I fear that a sense of fatalism has taken hold. But our task is to say, no, we won't accept this slide into greater and greater conflict, instability, and injustice. Instead, we will do all we can to change it. This is the moment to reassert fundamental principles and our willingness to defend them, to recommit to the UN, to internationalism, to the rule of law. That's why the new Pact for the Future is so important. We must put new energy and creativity into conflict resolution and conflict prevention, reverse the trend towards ever greater violence, make the institutions of peace fit for purpose, and hold members to their commitments under the UN Charter. I can announce today that we're creating a new facility, the British International Investment, which will work with the City of London to mobilise billions in pension and insurance funds to invest in boosting development and fighting climate change. This is a great British innovation.
So we hear from that the plan is to take billions from people who didn't ask for this in the first place and channel it to wherever it is that they want to go with this. But what I want to point out in particular is to go back into the history, as I've been doing for the past few weeks, of where all this comes from at the UN. And we can go back again to the early 1970s. There's a book that is available through the UN Digital Library, which you can download for free, called In Defense of the Earth. And it contains 3 key documents from 1971, 1972, and 1974. 1971 was the first report that started talking about the relationship between development and environment and looking at issues of the environment related to what governments should be doing. And then the first conference that we had that talked about the issues of climate change and all these issues around what we need to do to save the planet, so to speak, was in Stockholm in 1972, which I will come back to in just a minute. We also had the 26 principles that were adopted at that conference about the relationship between the Earth and humans, and there were recommendations and an action plan. And then thirdly, in that book in 1974, we had the Kokiak Declaration, which resulted in further issues around saying that things weren't working. And they actually concluded in that report that more people are hungry, sick, shelterless, and illiterate today than when the United Nations was first set up. So does that mean the UN isn't actually really helping? So going back to the Stockholm Conference in 1972, this was a landmark conference. It was the first place where they started really talking about what they were going to do about the environment. So let's hear from Barbara Ward, who was a British economist who spoke at this conference. And what did Barbara have to say to us in 1972?
We have got to learn to live with stabilized populations, with a more modest use of resources, and we cannot cheat by simply saying we're going to carry on with the same division as we have now, because if 2/3 of humanity, as our delegates have been telling us again and again today, if 2/3 are to stay poor so that 1/3 can stay rich, my friends, they won't do it. It's as simple as that. Are we going to hear from our governments that they're going to sign the Environmental Declaration, that they're going to look after the oceans, that they're going to take a new look at the redistribution of world resources? Okay, it sounds splendid, but what guarantee have we that you don't mesmerize yourself by saying a thing is going to happen and then somehow kid yourself that it has happened? It hasn't happened, it will be very difficult, and it'll only happen in fact if there are enough citizens and enough people in this world who have this new vision and are prepared to stay with it, not only when they're young, but when they're infinitely decrepit. In other words, right through and right on. And to me, the great importance of Stockholm is the fantastic number of people who've come to this place under their own steam, under their own expense, because they want to participate in saving the planet that they love.
So we see a quite passionate woman there about these issues. She was one of the first to talk about the concept and the idea of sustainability in relation to the environment. Also in that video from that conference, there's a man called Professor Barry Commoner, who is from Washington University in the States, and he talked quite a bit about colonization. And from what I got from this is that he really believes that colonizing and the effect of colonization, we speak a lot about decolonization, or at least I do, talking about what decolonization means for the West, which is the destruction of our civilization, destruction of our culture. And I think essentially in the future, our resources and our money, if that's not, well, it's probably happening already. And so he had a paper that he wrote in 1975, which is called How Poverty Breeds Overpopulation and Not the Other Way Around. And ultimately what he said in this paper is that the West is responsible for the overpopulation problem due to us having a low death rate and a high standard of living. And he identified colonialism as a kind of democratic parasitism. So we are democratic parasites here in the West, according to Professor Commoner. He ended with the idea that if the root cause of the world population crisis is poverty, then to end it, we must abolish poverty. And if the cause of poverty is the grossly unequal distribution of the world's wealth, then to end poverty and with it the population crisis, we must distribute that wealth among nations and within them. So we directly see the Marxist language coming in right there. So this, along with the limits to growth from the Club of Rome, which I've covered, as well as Paul Raskin, where Paul Raskin mentioned in his book, Journey to Earthland, which I've cited previously, he referenced this 1972 conference. And what he said in that book was that the actions failed to match the rhetoric until the UN came up with their SDG agenda, or the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, back in 2015, which we now see, of course, in Agenda 2021. In 1992, we had the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which is where Agenda 21 was really started to work on there. That was kind of the foundational part of Agenda 21, and it was called the Earth Summit. So let's see what John Major, our prime minister at the time, had to say at that conference.
The world is our garden, and together we must cultivate it. This week at Rio, we have made a start. Beyond Rio, we must continue to carry it through. Mr. Chairman, for our generation and for future generations, there can be no other way. Thank you.
So at that Earth Summit, we see that the concept of sustainable development was an attainable goal for all of the people of the world, regardless of where they were at the local, national, regional, or international level. That had a result of 27 principles. The first one being human beings are at the center of concerns for sustainable development. They are entitled to a healthy and productive life in harmony with nature. And so with the third principle was the right to development must be fulfilled so as to equitably meet, so there's the Marxist language again, developmental and environmental needs of present and future generations. And what I want to say with this is that we see there's principles, we see these actions, we see these statements. And so then this leads us to this past week when we have the Pact for the Future, the Global Digital Compact, the Declaration on Future Generations, which is all the same language over and over again, where we're saying, well, we have these principles, we're going to save the planet, we're going to worship nature, we're going to worship man and the relationship between man and nature. And it all just eventually goes ahead to 2030 agenda on sustainable development. And so what I'm saying is I don't really see anything any different from what they were starting to do with us over 50 years ago. But what's next in this particular agenda, which was announced, was the climate plans, which are called NDCs, or nationally determined contributions. And in 2025, this will be due. He told the world leaders that this requires aligning energy strategies with a 1.5 degree world, ending fossil fuel subsidies, and putting a price on carbon. So each party that signed up to the Paris Agreement is required to establish one of these and update it every 5 years. The UK does have one. Yeah, I will have the link to it in the show notes if you want to see what our national contributions are. So thanks for that. And later on in the show, I will talk a little bit more about some detailed points about the Pact for the Future and what this actually means for future generations, Brian.
Diane, thank you very much for that. And of course, we've got to keep reminding our audience that Keir Starmer has said his priority is with the UN, Davos, these other bodies. He simply regards national parliament as being a tribal area which can't really do anything. So this man is running the globalist of policies. But while these global policies are being fed to the population of UK, we're to be concerned about things like this. So this is the Telegraph. Big thanks to Kenny for pointing me at this particular article. And as we'll see a little bit of follow-up, but the headline is that chicken keepers must register to beat bird flu, contact details, species and purpose required under new rules to cut disease outbreaks. So this is all fear factor from the Telegraph, no serious challenge to the government what's going on, but it takes social media to actually get into the depths of things. So here we've got Sasha Yanshins in saying this. In the UK, we have a new law where you must register any birds on your property with the government by the 1st of October. So if you keep chickens or ducks or maybe emus, you must now register them because the UK government likes having insane overreach and enjoys abusing authority. Absolutely correct what this man is saying. What is happening is absolute insanity. But if we go on, Jeff Buys Cars responded, where is the link? I want to have a play. I want to encourage my 140,000 subscribers to do the same. Lots of pigeons and pheasants around here. They need to be represented. So has social media got some power? Well, maybe. Let's just have a look at this because thank you, Kenny, for pointing out that last night the ministry was saying that they were experiencing an extremely high volume of applications. We currently aim to process applications within 30 days. If you haven't already submitted an application, if you have already submitted an application, do not submit another one. And then by today, we got this. Sorry, there's a problem with the service, which would essentially shut down. And we're going to say the problem is not with the service. The problem is with the government, and the population of this country needs to be awake in order to stop this sheer madness. Now, where does this all head? Well, one of the things that we're seeing in the background is madness about animals, whether it's badgers or indeed it's culling other animals. And it's a little bit of Ben here, because I'm just going to remind people that in Maoist China, they targeted sparrows at one point, 1958 to 1962, they killed billions of sparrows, and as a result they had severe ecological imbalance, which ultimately helped fuel a famine in the country. So where does insanity take us? It takes us to this sort of thing. And if you think that's a little bit extreme, well, I'm going to remind you of the excellent UK column documentary Slaughtered on Suspicion, which was about the obscenity of the slaughter of millions of farm animals in this country on the back of a lie. Let's have a look at a little clip of that documentary.
Another hammer blow for Britain's farmers, the return of foot and mouth disease. It poses no threat to humans, but all affected animals, sickly and weakened, are slaughtered to stop it spreading.
So the precedent is here in this country, and of course you register all your chickens or your birds, and this allows the government to carry on and cull them at their leisure sometime in the future. So a lot of thought needs to go into this by the population, particularly people in farming or small holding at least. Ben, just before we bring Ben in contrast to the zealousness at which the government is going for chickens, the government doesn't want to release information to do with child abuse and child protection. This is all to do with Sheffield and environments and the abuse of children. We've been pointing out that a gentleman's been asking the Home Office under Freedom of Information to release information about what was and was not done in order to protect children, but the Home Office is still withholding information. This is now going to go to the Information Commissioner's Office, but this is the reality of the UK government. It's giving us orders about what we can and cannot do with one hand, and the other hand, it simply does as it pleases. Ben, that's probably a good background to bring you in here.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'll start off with a question, which is the US State Department deliberately attacking the US Constitution and trying to undermine free speech? Let's find out. We're going to start by talking about Nina Jankowicz, who we've spoken about extensively over the past couple of years, the former disinformation czar for the Biden administration, seen here a couple of weeks ago in Brisbane in Australia, talking about propaganda, on which she is an expert. And she was there to talk about this report that she's just produced called It's Everyone's Problem, Mainstreaming Responses to Technology-Facilitated Gender-Based Violence, TFGBV. And I'm not going to say that too many times because it's a bit of a tongue twister, but I am first of all going to define what it means. So this comes from the report. We can see here that TFGBV is any act that is committed, assisted, aggravated, or amplified by the use of information communication technologies or other digital tools that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological, social, political, or economic harm or other infringements of rights and freedoms, which is an extraordinarily expansive definition for anything, but actually what it amounts to is people saying hurty words on the internet that we don't agree with, as I'll explain to you as we go along. Now, the report includes a case study focused on this woman, Julie Inman Grant, who is the E-Safety Commissioner for the Australian government, which is why Nina Jankowicz was doing a tour in Australia. So Inman Grant is in an unelected position. She's a civil servant. She's also an American citizen, and we can find out a bit more about her from her profile on the World Economic Forum website. So let's have a little look. In the role that she's fulfilling, she leads the world's first government regulatory agency committed to keeping its citizens safer online. So Australia are taking the lead on this. Her career began in Washington, D.C., working in the US Congress and the nonprofit sector before she took a role at Microsoft, where she spent 17 years focused on government relations. So she's very much in that public-private partnership space. She also worked at Twitter, where she set up and drove the company's policy, safety, and philanthropy programs across Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia, which led her into living in Australia, where she is today. And in 2020, the World Economic Forum and Apolitical, who we've spoken about previously, appointed the commissioner as one of the Agile 50. So agile is a word used in digital innovation. This is very much in a digital position. And they described her as being one of the world's most influential leaders, revolutionizing government, right? So really, in the hot seat internationally, in the transformation of our governments. Now, let's go back to the story in the report. So, we, as I said, there's a case study here, and they're talking about a specific instance that happened to Julie Inman-Grant. So, Australia's e-safety commissioner woke up for the 7th day in a row as the target of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. The abuse had begun a week earlier on April 15th when she issued a takedown notice to the social media platform X, formerly Twitter, requiring that the platform remove a video of a violent stabbing of a bishop that had taken place at a church in Wakeley in Australia. So it was a video of this gentleman here, Bishop Murray Emmanuel, who was stabbed while delivering a sermon in church by a young man of Lebanese descent. And the concern was that this would spark off racial tensions, and the demand was put into Twitter that the video be taken down. Elon Musk refused to take it down, and they ended up in a legal battle, right? This has actually escalated quite considerably. And Grant received a tidal wave of criticism online about censorship, which, for my money, is really par for the course. If you're in a government position looking at freedom of speech issues and you're demanding that things be taken down from the internet that, frankly, I think of public interest, then you're going to receive some criticism. That's just par for the course. But this has now become a central safety issue, essentially, for the Australian government, right? So if you go to the E-Safety Commissioner's Office website, on the front page, we can see here they're talking about preventing gender-based violence online. And what is essentially kind of a personal beef between Musk and Grant has now been elevated into something that is front and centre in Australian policy, but also more importantly, in some ways, American policy, right? So Twitter is a US company and a global digital platform. And just pulling on the report again here, I can see that Inman-Grant noted that the lack of regulation, particularly in the United States, is hurting women around the world. Until the US actually regulates, she said, the rest of the world is going to be fighting a losing battle. So that is essentially a demand to rewrite the US Constitution in order to prevent government officials from being subjected to criticism online. Now, I know they dress it up as being a much more expansive issue than that, and this issue of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. But what she's talking about is the criticism that she personally received on the internet for demanding that this information be censored, and is trying to use this to agitate a change not just to Australian law, but also to US law and international law as well. Really, really crucial to understand, not least because of who is behind the report. All right, so let's have a little look at this organisation, Vital Voices Global Partnership. It's a non-profit founded, according to its website, on the simple idea that nations and communities cannot move forward without women's voices in leadership positions. We invest in women leaders who are taking on the world's greatest challenges, from gender-based violence to the climate crisis, economic inequities, and more. It's an international network. It's funded by global corporations and philanthropic groups, including Airbnb, Avon, Bank of America, Bumble, the Gates Foundation, Google, Uber, Comcast, who owns Sky News in the UK, who I'll talk about a little bit later on. So this is corporate and philanthropic money. They are extraordinarily wealthy as an organization. So in 2021, they opened a global headquarters building in Washington, D.C., in this 8-story townhouse right in the center of US imperial power, in walking distance to the White House, the US Capitol, the World Bank, the Aspen Institute, the IMF, Black Lives Matter Plaza. These are the organizations and buildings and locations that Vital Voices reference in their own literature. So this is how they're positioning themselves as being part of this ecosystem, really importantly. They've had an enormous reach over the past 28 years. They've been operating for 28 years now. They claim to impact 3 million people each year. They're operating in 185 countries and territories, and they have 20,000 change makers across their global network. Change makers being a very important word, right? So this is common purpose language. These are the networks that we see who are radically shifting governance and economic activity and culture across the Western world. And they're doing that from the very top levels. So people on their advisory board include leaders in global politics and global business, including from some of the companies that we've already mentioned, but also they're recruiting very actively from younger generations as well, with networks and chapters and clubs popping up in universities across the US and further afield, right? So they're actively recruiting into their program. And what does that program deliver for the young women who are engaged on it? Well, quite a lot, actually. So this is, again, from their website, and they talk about holistically investing in women leaders, providing an enabling environment, giving them leadership training, providing visibility and credibility through awards programs and that kind of thing, providing access to a global network, giving them backing in crisis situations, providing them with access to money so that they can bring their vision to life, shift culture. So we're on the outside of this thing now, outside of this diagram now. We can see that the women in the program are going to shift culture. That's the stated aim here. They're going to reinvest in their communities and beyond, and they're going to gain global recognition, right? So this is women, young women and less young women who want to be at the center of the global conversation. I think that draws on a very particular type of individual. But let's hear a little bit about them from this short film produced in 2011.
Now, women worldwide in many areas of society are diligently working to improve the quality of their lives and the lives of other women. And each year, the non-governmental group Vital Voices Global Partnerships recognizes some of these women. This year's recipients for the 10th annual Vital Voices Global Leadership Awards hail from India, Israel, Afghanistan, Burma, and Cameroon. They are working to halt the trafficking of girls, brokering peace between Israelis and Palestinians, breaking into the male-dominated field of carpentry, maintaining the fight for justice, and running for president. All to make life better for women and children.
So again, this is an international network which is purely about women helping other women. And the thing I find slightly confusing about this is where are all the men in these countries? Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that men aren't responsible for acts of violence or anything like that. Absolutely they are. But just excluding them completely from the conversation seems counterproductive to me. But let's find out a bit more about one of the founders of Vital Voices, Hillary Clinton.
United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, a strong advocate for women's rights and a founder of Vital Voices, commended the recipients' achievements. Acknowledging that there's still work to be done, Secretary Clinton pledged to continue advancing women's causes.
This is not only an urgent foreign policy challenge for me. It is not simply a social justice issue, the most important, in my view, for the 21st century. But it is a personal mission as well.
So, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is one of the founders of this organization, absolutely critical, as we'll come on to in a moment. And then let's finally hear from Alice Nelson, who is the Chief Executive of Vital Voices.
We invited 500 of the next rising generation, young women and girls. Are you out there? I hope that you will leave here knowing that you have the power, you have the voice, and you also have the responsibility to stand up and make change.
So young women and girls, actually, she says they're shifting culture, wielding power, and making change. That was Alice Nelson. As I said, she is the chief executive of Vital Voices. She's been there pretty much since its inception 25 years ago. And before that, she was working on the Vital Voices Global Democracy Initiative program as the deputy director at the US State Department. So this was initiated by the US State Department under the Clinton administration, has built a global network of female change makers who are actually, many of them are actually currently engaged in agitating to rewrite US legislation and suppress free speech.
Ben, thank you very much. Lots to think about there. But let's move on. If you like what the UK column is doing, we need your financial support, and that is best done as joining us as a member. So if you get online, have a look, you can make a donation. Of course, that helps us, but it's the monthly memberships that count. So if you're watching, you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, then do think about that monthly membership. You can also do an annual membership, or you can be bold and take a lifetime membership, which many people have, and we're immensely grateful. You can, of course, buy something from the shop. It's getting colder here in UK at least, so you might like one of those hoodies. And we're also working with Clyde DeCarl, who's, of course, advertising his health products, which you can buy via the site, and that helps us. Now, we'd also like to say, share the material. This is why we do it. So we like this little visual of Bob Moran with Charles and Mike. But, of course, all these little links here show the comments, and it shows where these things are linked. So you can help us enormously by helping to spread the information that we're putting out with recognition of the column. Oops, beg your pardon. Let's just go back one. So we've got coming out tomorrow. This is Mike's interview with David Segal, who did the climate change conferences, which were very successful. In this one, they're going to be talking more about health-related issues. And this one here is with Ben and Diane. Ben, I don't know whether you'd like to give a little bit of commentary about this little interview you two did.
Sure thing, yeah. So Diane and I had a fantastic conversation about the attack on higher education and what needs to be done to defend our academic institutions and to rebuild them ultimately in a way that is for the benefit of our society ultimately. I mean, we're talking about really fundamental civilizational problems that we've got and how to fix them. And this is at the Pattern Substack, which is one of the projects that I run, and you can find that at Pattern18, pattern18.substack.com. It's a great listen. There's a bunch of other stuff on there as well.
Okay, excellent. So thank both of you for doing that. Now, reminder that we do still have some tickets for the UK column on location in Bristol on the 19th. Not many. So if you haven't bought a ticket, you've been thinking about it, we'd love you to come and join us. Get online and make that purchase. It is going to be a phenomenal event. I was told yesterday Kim Isherwood from Public Child Protection Wales is going to come and join us as well. So if you haven't got a ticket, I'm saying to you, think you should get on and get a ticket before those actually disappear. Now, as I've said before, sorry, I lost track of my days. Saturday, Charles Mallet and myself were at the Heritage Party conference. We went because we believe the party's doing some good work. We were invited as guest speakers. What I will say to the audience is we're willing to support any individual or small political party that's really doing good work. On this occasion, it happened to be the Heritage Party. We spoke on the subject of fighting the New World Order, the rules-based international order, as it's often called now. Charles particularly talking about free speech. And a key part of what I was talking about to the audience is you can't fight what you cannot see and you don't understand. And this is why we think the UK column news is so important, because if you understand what's happening around you, you're capable of standing up and doing something about it. And ultimately, of course, the battle is for our minds. This is what we face. This is what the attack is by the deep state and the rules-based international order. It's for our minds and the minds of the children. Now, what was so important about the Heritage Party conference was this is the first time I have ever seen a political party get into the real agendas that people are facing in this country. So they weren't holding back. They were getting into all the key subjects, including the rules-based international order, and they were being very frank in their delivery to the audience. Let's have a little listen to party leader David Curtin.
Well, as I've said before, we're against war, but how much does that cost? $3 billion a year promised to the Zelensky regime? Scrap that, and we'll have that for our nation. $5 billion a year on migrant hotels for illegal migrants? Scrap that. Migrants who come to this country illegally should not be rewarded. They shouldn't even be here, and we can scrap that, and we can scrap the foreign aid budget, which in total is another £12 billion which we have for this country. Let's get rid of all the diversity, inclusion and equality offices. They're just a massive waste of time and money. And while we're at it, we can scrap the Equalities Act, which puts in place this two-tier system that we don't need, because we already have a common law where everyone's equal before the law anyway. We don't need the Equality Act 2010 brought in by Tony Blair, Harriet Harman, or Harriet Harperson, as she's often known, and then ratified by Theresa May. We don't need it. Let's get rid of all the climate subsidies, which are a massive waste of money into the black hole of solar barons and wind barons. And the $12 billion that they have pledged to send abroad, I mean, this is absolutely crazy. They're saving £1.5 billion from targeting pensioners, but they're giving 8 times that away to foreign wind barons. Yeah. It's insane. And it is disdain for the people of this country. It needs to stop. And let's defund all the NGOs and all the quangos, which are just an utter waste of money, that are paid by the government to lobby the government in a vicious circle where they then are used to put in more draconian regulations and increase totalitarianism in this country.
Well, interesting, isn't it? Because essentially he's talking about the madness which we've heard in relation to the chicken policy at the start of the news. And he's saying we've got to cut all of this nonsense out in order to get our country back under control and operating normally. But alongside him, some other excellent speakers. I can't do them all, but I've just taken some of the other speakers, of which Dr. Liz Evans, absolutely fantastic. And my goodness, warning about horrors of doctors' surgeries, sending letters to children as young as 11 to engage them in supposed looking after their own health. Let's have a listen to what she said.
Health during COVID. Elderly people were starved of touch, and many died alone, uncomforted by loved ones. Children were denied an education, were forced to wear face masks for hours a day when they did return to school, and were robbed of months of socialisation and playing with their friends. And basic rights such as travel and even entry to shops were made contingent on taking a vaccine, being tested or wearing a mask. As a Christian, and I think Brian said this earlier, I believe you can judge a tree by its fruit. So, to understand if a policy is right or wrong, we must look at the impact. And looking at these pictures, we see pain, suffering, and cruelty. This is what unethical looks like. And most importantly, this was a choice. Political and medical decisions were made in a moral and ethical vacuum.
So that was, of course, only a short excerpt, but she covered some really, really disturbing things. And this was the importance of the conference in my mind. It was dealing with the reality of what's happening in this country. Let's have a listen here to Kim Isherwood talking about what's been going on with children in UK in 2024.
Not only did we get him cancelled, we owned him. He turned to Twitter to complain, and that is a direct quote from Peter Tatchell, by the way. In 30 years I have never been cancelled. We all did the bit until I tried to go to Wales. So not only did we get him cancelled, and then he went to Twitter, he then deleted his tweet, because he didn't want to bring any attention to it. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is one hell of an achievement, and that proves what you can do when you won't put up with this in your own country. So the NSPCC has finally given in, and they have finally given me their research in the form of 2 studies by a female in New South Wales in Australia, Walsh. These 2 studies are simply surveys of sexual prevention programs, ladies and gentlemen. This does not safeguard, this grooms. You say, oh no, they're not going to teach masturbation to 4-year-olds. No way will they do that. Not straight out, no, they go out around it, don't they? So here we've got self-stimulation. They said 241 schools in England, and I'm going to read this out to you. There are rules about touching yourself too.
Well, if people don't know about Public Child Protection Wales and the work of Kim Isherwood and her team, have a look on the UK Column website, search for her name, and you can see the interviews that we've done. Last little clip, this is a very interesting filmmaker, Richard Jeffs, and he was talking about his film exposing all of the rules-based international order and the globalists.
Great Reset campaign, and we just wanted to put this film out with all this information. And that went out, it was called The New Normal, that was in 2020, late 2020. I was a bit concerned because I'm exposing all these people as being corrupt, tyrannical.
In this series, I discover what stakeholder capitalism is and how its inclusive and sustainable policies are changing our society.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Make some noise if you think that trans rights are human rights.
People are dying. Children are starving. Families are fleeing their homes.
I also investigate an initiative called the Great Reset of Capitalism for transitioning us to full stakeholder capitalism by 2030.
The World Economic Forum is now very much engaged into this initiative of shaping a great reset.
This is a time for a great reset.
Reset the ways in which we live.
Join me as I investigate the Great Reset transition to stakeholder capitalism.
So a really fascinating film, a lot of detail, really excellent work by that filmmaker. And of course, did you hear those present booing the king as he appeared on screen in the little film clip? Now, something I pushed to the audience, I think it's absolutely true, is if we look in history, it's only a few people that have taken control of countries, nations, groups of nations in the world. And the devil's disciples, as I've got them here, with it only takes a few. We need to be fully aware that it only takes a few politicians in order to take control of a country to do truly horrific things. But of course, in the background, as we've been covering in the UK Column News in recent weeks, we've got to be aware of the New World Order and what it means and the organisations involved. Here we're calling it the Underworld Order because, of course, criminality is an inherent part. And just remind our audience that Mike Robinson back in 2009 was highlighting the emergence of the New World Order. This is an independent article where the journalist is saying that Joe Biden caused uproar by using the phrase of the New World Order, but he said it was an unfortunate choice of words. Well, it wasn't an unfortunate choice of words, it was the real thing. This is the sort of journalist, this is Joe Summerlad. He's really interested in US politics or cinema, novels, insolent noise, but basically another man who appears ignorant of what's actually going on. Let's just have a look at this little clip with Gordon Brown to understand that when they talk about a new world order, rules-based international order, they absolutely mean what they say.
All these new challenges are bringing together about the biggest restructuring we have ever seen, not just of the global economy, but of the global order as a whole. And 200 years ago, a famous British Foreign Secretary said that the new world had been called into existence to redress the balance of the old. In 1990, another old world ended, dominated by the Cold War, and people talked then, in 1990, of a new world order. What they actually meant then was a new political order. And what was not foreseen then, but is obvious now from everything that we see and do, what we experience in every day of our life, is the sheer scale and speed and scope of globalization. And it's only now that we can begin to understand that the world order that globalization brings and what it's going to look like, it's driven forward now not just by the balance of military strength, the Cold War times, or ordinary political power. It's being driven forward by a seismic shift in economic power that we see around us. But what does the New World Order mean for countries like ours who are looking to succeed? I suggest that the countries...
Well, I think we've heard enough of that. We get the point. I'd just like to say to the audience that, of course, it's the UK column that's been warning about what's been happening. This was our report at the time of the New World Order coming, Gordon Brown talking about it, and we deliberately used the colours of red and black. And I'll just very quickly say that at the conference, many people talking on key areas where we have to fight in order to fight against this rules-based international order, whether it's free speech or sticking up for the state and the nation. Okay, we had to eat, but also here protecting our children, looking after the Constitution, looking after animals, an important part of staying well and mentally healthy. The New World Order wants to destroy faith in God, but at the end of the day, it's the local councillors who are fighting the battle, which are important. And I also reminded people to be happy whilst they are standing up to be counted. Ben, very briefly, you've got a little video clip here, but you're aware of yet more parts of our fundamental infrastructure being closed.
Absolutely, yes. So I took this short film earlier, not this week, last week. I was up in Nottingham for a few days, and this was on the coach journey on the way back. You can see the video on the right-hand side there, and that is Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station. And today marks the day when it will be closed and we will transition into a coal-free era. And you can see a little post from LinkedIn on the left-hand side from E3G, which is a climate group run by former Blair people. They were advising him while he was in number 10, which is also directly linked to the Club of Rome. The president of the Club of Rome, Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, sits on the board of E3G. So this is part of delivering this international agenda. And I'll just read out a couple of key points while the video plays. It does look quite majestic, I think, the power station there on the right-hand side. You know, I always thought it was a bit of an eyesore growing up, but it feels quite poignant looking at it here. So as they say in the post here, as we approach October 1st, the UK will celebrate an historic milestone, the first day of the coal-free power era, following the closure of the Ratcliffe-on-Soar coal power plant at midnight on September 30th. This coal phase-out moment marks a significant turning point in our energy transition. How we achieved it, I'll just riff on a couple of these points here. By setting ambitious climate targets, so the 2008 Climate Change Act marked the beginning of the phase-out journey. That was obviously under Blair. Critical regulations. In 2009, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband announced the end of new unabated coal projects, signaling a decisive shift away from coal. Investing in alternatives, so this is a multi-party thing, so the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government in 2013 invested heavily in the wind industry to make coal less attractive. And then they introduced market reforms for renewables, which facilitated huge investments in power infrastructure and allowed greater integration of renewable energy into the grid. And they see this as a template for international development. I think this is really crucial for people to understand. The UK is at the vanguard of this transformation. And they talk here about the Powering Past Coal Allowance, which includes 181 national, subnational and non-state actors who are committed to ending unabated coal power, who are going to be implementing similar plans over the coming years. So this is the end of an era, and I will certainly be interested to see what happens next. But as you said, Brian, it feels like a deliberate degradation of national sovereignty and capability.
And of course, Ben, this is not national policy. This is international globalist policy, wrecking our infrastructure in our country. Diane, what's the future hold?
That's a good question, Brian. Apparently, the UN wants to tell us what's going to happen with generations who haven't been born yet. But what I'd like to talk a little bit now, again, is about children who are here now and what's happening with them. On Thursday evening, I attended a talk through Common Knowledge Edinburgh, which is a group that I'm involved in. And the speaker was Stuart Baird, who is a high school teacher from the Scottish Union of Education, which is a group I'm also involved in. And Stuart was talking about what is known as in Scotland is called the Curriculum for Excellence, which has been around for 20 years. And he was investigating what was going on in Scottish education and basically the abject failure of the curriculum for so-called excellence. And it was actually called, I think, the End of Excellence or something like that. Please End Excellence. And what he was talking about in relation to this curriculum in Scotland was, we've kind of seen an end to subject-based education where they've discontinued subjects like geography and things that students really need to know, where you learn facts and you learn how to do things in favor of other things. For example, one area of the Curriculum for Excellence is called Relationships, Sexual Health, and Parenthood, or which is known as RSHP in Scotland. And it's really, really, really unfortunate when you look into some of this content, and it ties back to what Kim Isherwood was covering at the Heritage Party conference around things that children should not be exposed to. And I just want to go into some examples here in Scotland and in other countries and what this means for what the UN has said about the future and the Pact for the Future. One of the examples of the Curriculum for Excellence curriculum, which is actually directly taken from the materials, and I want to thank the group Scott Pegg for this, which is professionals who are from health education and social work who have concern about the approaches to trans ideology and gender dysphoria. Here's a photograph from some of the curriculum which says, babies can't talk, so grown-ups make a guess by looking at their bodies. So then we go into those issues around assigned at birth. No, we're not assigned at birth. We are born something or other, right? One or the other, essentially. Some of the other materials that teachers are instructed to cover is about transphobia. And it says to teachers to introduce the word transphobia. This is a word that explains when someone is hurt or put down because they are transgender. Key point to get over, acknowledge that for people who are transgender, things can be difficult when other people are cruel or rude to them. Remember, this is for children in Scotland. If we go back to the UN and their Pact for the Future and what they've been promoting, this has been on Twitter this week through the UN Geneva Twitter account, X account. Every child has the right to learn in a safe environment, it says. Children, civilians, and schools are hashtag not a target. They must be protected at all times under international humanitarian law. But we see what's actually happening, right? If we look at some of the other materials that I've just seen from the past week, just like looking online and being on social media, over in the US, we have a period party for ages 8 to 13 in a library in Pennsylvania. September the 24th is for all of our cisgender friends. October the 1st is for our trans and non-binary friends. Please sign up for the party that is most appropriate for your child. Again, this is for ages 8 to 13. Regardless of how you identify or as you think your child identifies. We also see in Ireland, we have Libraries Ireland, where there are subject headings, which is a library term if you're looking in library catalogs, sex instruction for children, juvenile literature, sex instruction for children miscellanea, sex instruction for children study guides, sex instruction for children with mental disabilities, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting about this as well is if we go back to the Global Digital Compact that is in the Pact for the Future, where they said we commit by 2030 to prioritize the development and implementation of national online child safety policies and standards in compliance with international human rights law, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And of course, that means the child is an individual and can basically do or say or, look at whatever they want to look at, online and otherwise. And they do specifically mention child sexual exploitation material, as well as solicitation or grooming for the purpose of committing a sexual offense against a child. Obviously, we're not supposed to do that. They tie this directly to Sustainable Development Goal 3, which ensures healthy lives and promotes well-being for all at all ages. My interpretation of this, the unsustainable goals, as I did for UK Column several weeks ago, it basically means you will be modified, which could mean transgenderism. It could mean a lot of other things, right? If we look at a book that has been featured as well in this book from the Libraries Ireland catalog, which I found, is called The Everybody Book. This is for children ages 8 to 12. It is the LGBTQ plus inclusive guide for kids about sex, gender, bodies, and families, inclusive of all sexual orientations and gender identities. It will help answer children's questions and spark open discussion with parents, as well as carers and teachers. In the Scouts here in the UK, there is a game that is available called Pronoun Pairs. And what you're supposed to do with Pronoun Pairs, the game to play in the Scouts, is you have different sets of cards that you give to the children. And Sam the dog is a he, him. Leslie the ladybird is she, her. Billy the butterfly is non-binary. To play, the dealer will flip over an animal card and a topic card. Whoever says the sentence on the topic using the correct pronouns for the animal gets to keep the topic card. For example, if it was Billy ate a sandwich, the answer would be they, non-binary, ate a sandwich. This is for as young as Cub Scouts, which starts at 8 years of age. Over in the United States, we have the top #1 challenged book in 2023, according to statistics from the American Library Association, which is Genderqueer, which has been complained about by parents for having too much LGBTQIA plus content and claimed to be sexually explicit. The author uses air pronouns. I'm not sure what those mean, but the content includes bonding with friends over erotic gay fan fiction, facing the trauma and fundamental violation of pap smears. Started as a way to explain to Air family what it means to be non-binary and asexual. It is a useful and touching guide on gender identity. So there we have just a few ideas there of kind of what's going on. Just a quick note, if we haven't had enough attack on the children, we are now attacking space, according to the UN. So we covered in 2023 back on UK Column, King Charles unveiling the Astra Carta, which was obviously to welcome astronauts and business leaders and so on. This was a space sustainability event at Buckingham Palace. The Astra Carta is to create and accelerate sustainable practice across the global space industry. And the reason I brought this back is because in the Pact of the Future, it mentions space as action number 56, which is the very last action point in the Pact of the Future. We did have the UN's Outer Space Treaty in 1967, which identified the exploration and use of outer space as the province of all humankind. But we have had several space conferences since then, which are called Unispace, or Conference on the Peaceful Exploration of Outer Space. So now what we're going to see in 2027 is the working on the Space 2030 agenda, which is also going to be looking at these peaceful uses of outer space as work streams on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities, space resources, and sustainable lunar activities converge. And we have 4 main areas here: the space economy, the space society, space accessibility, and space diplomacy. So if it wasn't enough to be attacking our children and generations that haven't been born yet, we are now going to make sure that outer space is sustainable, Brian. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm a little bit concerned.
I'm just about to slump onto the desk, actually, Diane, because some of this stuff now is just, it's in our faces. It's utter madness. These people have got to be stopped in the nicest way. Of course, Ben, none of this could happen without big money circulating to pay for all of these non-government organisations, think tanks, charities, foundations. What have you got?
Yes, absolutely. So the people who are funding the economic, cultural, psychological destruction of the nation are doing it in the name of philanthropy. Isn't that hideous, frankly. And we've seen an accelerating economic collapse in the UK. According to the Financial Times, 3 million people last year fell into financial difficulty. So we now have more than 20 million people in Britain who are living in what they call vulnerable circumstances, right? This is an absolute catastrophe. But fear not, Gordon Brown is here. We've been speaking about Gordon Brown quite a lot, which is remarkable given he is an unelected figure, never won a general election. But he's been put front and centre on some of these big initiatives. As we spoke about last week, he's a Fabian. We saw him earlier in the show talking about the New World Order, and he's just launched what they're calling a multibank. This is like a food bank, but it does more. It gives you access to all sorts of different things, from basic foods to baby products and toiletries. They've modelled this on a test case that they delivered in Scotland, in Fife, over the past couple of years. They've just launched one in London. They're going to be popping up all around the UK. Go to their website. They're all about fighting poverty, fighting pollution. They accept donations of money and also products that can be distributed by teachers, social workers, charities. They're going to get this all around the country to families in need. They think that they're going to have a really big impact. And in particular, they've developed this thing called social return. So they think they're going to deliver a social return of £5.96 for every £1 invested. I'm interested to dig into that a little bit more. And isn't this nice? Isn't this altruistic? But who's behind it? Well, we talked about Gordon Brown. Well, here's Shaheen Syed, the chief executive of Accenture in the UK. Accenture is one of the biggest global technology consultancies, and it's a strategic partner of the World Economic Forum. So that's who's behind it. Who else is behind it? Sky. So Dana Strong, Group Chief Executive of Sky, did a big launch event for this program last week at their headquarters, I believe it was. Sky is owned by Comcast. Comcast is a partner of Vital Voices, the US State Department-backed organization that I spoke about earlier on. And that event was attended by, amongst other people, Chris Bird, who's the UK country manager of Amazon, Matt Britton, who's the UK country manager at Google, more people from Accenture, Mark Reed from WPP, who's a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, Gail Reebok, who's the mother of Georgia Gould and the widow of Lord Gould, former advisor, close advisor to Tony Blair, Eric Salama from Verian Group, I've spoken about extensively on the show this year, people from Tata Consulting, the Financial Times, all of whom are directly linked to the World Economic Forum. So for me, this feels like a front, basically. We've destroyed your society, we've destroyed the economic system, we're attacking your culture on a daily basis, but here's a few free things to keep you quiet while we carry on doing more of the same.
Ben, thank you very much. That excellent analysis. It's truly disgusting what we're seeing unfold. We've got to keep lifting the stone, showing what's really happening. And I'm going to say to people, hold your MPs to account. You're getting all of this fantastic information, facts, analysis. What do you do with it? Get on the doorstep of your MPs, because they need to understand what they're part of. Many of them don't. Diane, you've got a video for us to end on.
Yes, hopefully this will end the news on a bit of a happy note today. I'm hoping. Let's see what happens.
Hello, everyone. This is Diane Rasmussen, McAdie from UK Column, reporting to you live from Edinburgh Waverley Station. It's after 10:30 at night. I just spent the day in the north of England meeting some amazing, like-minded people. We had an amazing time, and they were amazing to me. They bought my food, they bought my drinks. They even bought my extra train ticket when both of my trains were cancelled in both directions. But the most important thing is I'm back here in Edinburgh tonight, and I will be hopefully on the news in the morning if I can wake up in time. My message here is that it doesn't matter whatever happens. I know we report some really hard news. I know things are difficult. We really struggle. I struggle. We all do. But the most important thing to remember is that we have each other. And we have to remember, as Brian says, to love one another, to give each other a hug, to care for one another. And even if you can't stand in the park, as we did way back in the early days of you know what, you can always sit in the pub, as we did today. Thank you so much for being a part of UK Column. I love you all. Have a great day.
Diane, thank you very much. And that message, very poignant, very reminiscent of the feel and the environment in that Heritage Party meeting on Saturday. So lots of good people out there. And as we said at that conference, be happy, because the rules-based international order is terrified of informed, happy people. We'll end today's news there. If you're a member of UK Column, we'll be having UKC Extra in a few minutes. But thank you to the audience wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Bye-bye.